Okay, so this Todd Atkins, and I'm here with Miguel Iturrate, one of the longtime, people in the MMA scene, and also does a show of his own, Lights Out podcast with Chris Lytle. And I always like for people to introduce themselves because I assume some people listening to my show may not know some of the people that we have on our shows. So maybe you could introduce yourself a little bit.
Sure, great. Thanks for having me, Todd. I'm Miguel Iturrate. I'm from New York originally, but my MMA roots start in Indiana. I was the matchmaker for Jeff Osborne's Hook and Shoot starting in 1998. Uh, we worked together probably for about a decade, and I guess I left the sport sort of when the BoDog organization folded. They fired me and then they folded about a year later. But so I had a good 10-year run in the sport from the very beginning. Got to do a couple other things, but primarily I started with Hook and Shoot.
Now, what were you doing prior to Hook and Shoot that made you want to cross over into that? I mean, you must have had some interest.
No, I was a fan. A friend of mine and I had gone to see the UFC in Georgia. There was an Augusta, Georgia show, and that was only about 8 hours from where I was living in Maryland. And we drove, and I was married but didn't have kids, and he was married and had kids. And we got back, and we were all stoked. And I was like, all right, there's a Hook and Shoot in Indiana next week. You going? And he didn't go, and I did, and that's where I met Jeff. I kind of started from the very beginning. He was like needing help with a website, and that's kind of what I got. That was my in with him. Was I'd help him out with a website, and he'd help me out with a ticket and a hotel room. So.
Yeah, Jeff Osborne. So, what was your first introduction to him?
Yeah, to be honest, I met him at that Augusta, Georgia UFC. That was the one where Tank and Vitor fought in the back, or Vitor's group fought in the back. Waleed Ismail and stuff. And I knew that Jeff was cruising around there with a video camera, and that's kind of where the conversation started. I showed up at his show next week, and then from there, we made a good corroboration. But it was kind of came together quick. I met him at the UFC, and then the Hook and Shoot was the following week, if I'm not mistaken, on the calendar, sometime in '97.
Maybe tell me about, or people listen to this who weren't around then. You were just talking about this, how Jeff Osborne's walking around the vent with the video camera, and you kind of have these people that are in that circle that are just kind of coming up with the sport. Kind of tell me what that was like.
Well, that was definitely, I got to join that group. I guess, I went with my buddy the first time, and then after that, I didn't miss the UFC, and I was filming with Jeff and doing stuff like that. And it was small. You have to remember they came off a pay-per-view at some point around there, UFC 10, 12, around there. They were off pay-per-view, and they were basically relegated to National Guard armories. Augusta, Georgia, Topeka, Mississippi, places like that are, not frontline cities. You know what I mean? They're cool places. I enjoyed every single one of them, right? But you are, in 4,000 seat arenas. You're not in, like the UFC last night was on 16,000 people live, right? So it's a completely different thing. So you're in small arenas, the hotel, it was like, you had contact with people. I knew Joe Silva. Joe Silva wasn't the matchmaker at that point, but like Joe was, part of Bob Meyerowitz's entourage, and you'd find out, the hotel was so-and-so, and that's where all the fighters stayed. And you could always call up. I mean, imagine trying to call up and get a room now, hey, that's not going to work, right? But yeah, that's what you kind of did. You find out where the hotel was, you stayed in it or close by, and you covered it with a camera, and that was the start of the whole thing.
Yeah, there really wasn't like credentials and things back then. You were just kind of covering on your own, right? I mean, well, some of the guys were and some of them weren't.
Look, every once in a while, like we would show up. Like, I mean, Jeff and I legitimately had a product, right? Jeff and his video camera made a Fight World video magazine that was a monthly subscription, and that generated money for our show, right? So we did something with it, and the fighters saw it, and that gave us the ability to come back and back and back. But every once in a while, you'd see a guy like in press row with like a port, like the old port, throwaway cameras that you could buy because they weren't, really reporters. But yeah, you could do that. I mean, back then, again, John McCarthy's the ref. Basically, the credentials, the travel, the hotel, everything like that at that point was done by his wife, Elaine. So it was like, hey, go see Elaine, and hi, Miguel, and she'd give me my pass. So it was small. It was small. I remember when the UFC started, the first show I think Zuffa did was in Atlantic City, and it's pretty close to my house. I had at that point been doing shows in Atlantic City, so I went and I called Joe Silva, and I was like, hey, how's it going to work? And he's like, no, you got to talk to somebody, and it was some from the press agency, and then you never got your ticket or your credential from Joe again.
So what was Joe Silva like to you? I mean, I know a lot of people talk about him, and they have like these people have different stories. What was he like to work with from your experience?
Look, I used to trade tapes with him. There's a kind of like an old silly anecdote about him when he started with the UFC and they started to become corporate and big and stuff, that he took a picture of himself in his house and there was like a stack of like bootleg VHS tapes, probably some of those were mine, so he had a passion for the sport from the very beginning. He had his own things that he liked and stuff. But what we had in common was Shudo. Like he really enjoyed like Ruben Asado, and that was his that was one of the points that we always used to talk about, trade tapes, and that's what it was about. I set up, you have Joe, you got connections in Japan for tapes, you got a connection in Brazil, and you're good to go. And that's, kind of like what the early days were like. If you were going to see fights, that was really the only way you were going to see it, and it literally was, by the late 90s, we could probably count on getting a tape 3 to 5 days after the event. And that's pretty good, not like nowadays, but we were doing the best, we're doing the best we can. And at that point, I like to think, we saw every fight that was going on basically, right? Or close. So.
Yeah, I think the tape trading thing kind of made it special because you had to wait. Did you ever trade with Cal Dog?
Is that Cal Cooper?
No. Doug Keller was his name. He lived in Hawaii. And did you ever trade with anyone? Doug Keller was a guy who had a lot of tapes. A lot of guys in Hawaii, basically all the fighters, people that were into that kind of thing would go. His mom lived in the Ilokai Hotel, and he was really sick. Like he had a oxygen canister he would carry around everywhere. And the first time I went to his apartment, he had stacks like up to the ceiling of tapes, against his wall. And he had, I think, like 4 double deck VCRs just going nonstop. And yeah, I couldn't believe it,
Yeah.
And I got me one, a double deck VCR. I started doing a little bit of that. But he had just a huge collection. And he passed away maybe a few years after I got there. He passed away, and because he was real sick but yeah, I had a lot of his tapes actually. I think where I had got tapes from him. I traded with people too, on the mainland and stuff. But it was kind of exciting because you had to wait to get the tape in the mail. And,
Yeah.
now it's like instant gratification.
I can tell you one thing I remember too is, now remember I was a matchmaker, and I think that Joe and I sometimes you had access to like a tryout tape or things like that you get. Yep. And there was another level of tapes too that wasn't just event tapes and stuff. Like I remember getting a tape of Don Fry before he was in UFC, doing a dojo fight, and blue mats, and this rugged redhead fought him, and then I don't know, at some period later I got a similar tape of Ferrozo doing it, and I realized, dude, the guy warming up Fry and the guy warming up Ferrozo is the same guy. And like, I don't know who he is. He never fought before. I didn't know his name. I still don't know his name and everything like that. But there's, where were those guys going for those things? Questions like that come up still to me in my head now. You know what I mean? But it's like, I remember getting those tapes. I remember getting early Matt Serra tapes. Remember we did the first Abu Dhabi trials in '99, or it might have been 2000 actually. Yeah, 2000. But that led to a lot of tryout tapes coming my way too.
Yeah, speaking of Abu Dhabi, like, did you know, I take it you knew Miguel Torre,
Miguel Torre is
the guy who got in trouble for the homicide out in
oh,
California?
I think, is it Rafael Torre?
Yeah, Rafael Miguel Torre was what he
Oh,
said his
great.
name was, remember?
I guess the Miguel part I blacked out for some reason. But yeah, I knew him. I knew him. Um, you
Since
know,
we're going old school, let's talk about him a little bit.
I don't know. It's a situation where it's like, I don't mind. You could say, I have an antenna. I send something's up, and I stay away from people like that. So I didn't give him a lot of credit or any real like credit. Like, he worked for Abu Dhabi, but he's in California. Kid Peligro's in California, and he could get his pay for whatever he wrote and stuff out there, and he covered that scene, and that was foreign to me. I mean, I'm a Midwest fight scene guy, right? So it was management stuff. He showed up at a few shows at the Abu Dhabis. I didn't see him compete, but by then I think that the information was getting out that he wasn't legit. I can tell you, I don't know if did you listen to the Brian Garrity interview we did?
No, I haven't had a chance to.
I didn't know this until we interviewed Garrity. Garrity lived with Gerald Shrieben and Rafael Torre, like, around that time. He had moved out to California, wasn't involved with Strauss or any of those other guys, and he knows them pretty well. We touched on that subject, and I heard more about it than I knew. I just, Rafael Torre hit me the same way Jamie Levine did, and it was like, it's like, they're going to be around. It's like, there's nothing I can do. I'm not going to be I can't be an executioner, right? I can't get rid of them. So, like, they're going to be around. I dealt with them the way I did, which was just protect my shit and keep them away.
Yeah, and they had that. Did you see that Fighting in Plain Sight documentary that one guy, I'm trying to remember his name, he made a short documentary about Rafael Torre called Fighting in Plain Sight. It had Eddie Millis, and it had the guy from Tap Out, Dan Caldwell, a number of people talking about Rafael Torre. I don't know if you ever saw that, but if you did, I got to send it to you. It's on YouTube. It's really well done. And I'm sure you'd remember the guy's name if I mentioned who did it. It'll probably come up in my head while we're doing this. But if it does, I'll remind you. So let's kind of talk about, you said you were involved in Hook and Shoot. So what was your involvement? I know Jeff Osborne was the promoter. So were you like co-promoting with him, or?
No, I like in '97 after the UFC, I went there with an agreement to do the website. So he was starting to get on the internet and do things like that. And basically, I was the web guy. So I got to be ringside and take pictures and a few things like that. And that leads to taking pictures and things like that. And the truth is that Jeff manages like an awful lot. Like, I mean, Jeff is known as a promoter, but that doesn't give him any credit for like all the real production that he did. Like every one of the DVDs that he put out, the guy edited in his basement. Now it doesn't seem like much because the programs for editing and stuff, you just download on the internet and stuff like that. But when you were doing that in the '90s, that's a labor of love, and also, a lot of work that he's getting no credit for behind the scenes. On top of that, he's doing voiceovers, which to me, he was one of the best at really detailing the sport as a commentator and stuff. And he was doing them solo in his house. He's like, literally, like, I've seen him there faking, like, oh wait, I can't hear myself above the crowd. He's in, and he's in his room by himself. But that kind of stuff he gets no credit for. And I think that's actually a strong point in announcing and as opposed to promoting. You know what I mean? It's like, but those are a lot of hats to wear. And then there's the whole fighter relationship thing, which Jeff really cares about. You know what I mean? Like Jeff doesn't want to be, like Meyerowitz completely. Like Jeff knows the sport. He's with the guys. You know what I mean? He's like, but there does come a point where you have to do a real management with them, contracts. Hey, I need a picture. Later on blood work and all that stuff, and follow up and stuff like that. It's a lot for one man to do, and those are the duties that fell to me. So I was like the matchmaker.
Yeah, and TJ Thompson used to do some of that too. I went to his house and he would do voiceovers like after the event, and he even like gave his, he was the announcer of Super Brawl also, so he called himself Tommy Dakota when he was doing the voiceovers. He would say, "Let's go to our announcer Tommy Dakota," but really it was him, so he did a lot of that stuff
That's
too. And he
fantastic.
used to joke that it was easy to sound like an expert when you were calling the match after it had already happened,
Absolutely.
doing a voiceover in your house. But yeah, that blew me away when you're talking about that, Jeff, doing that stuff. TJ, I thought when I first got to Y, and I see this poster with his number on it, I thought it was going to be some office somewhere, you know, promoter's office, and it was just his house. He was doing it all out of there, just like you talked about with Jeff. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
it's amazing how far it's come since then.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the first time I showed up with Jeff's, he got me a hotel room, and probably, like 3, 4 shows later, like, I crashed on his couch for years, and I drove to Indiana for years, just to get a lot of shows done. And I mean, we got a lot of shows done, for the time and stuff. So yeah, I think that's the main part of it. Was he handed most of the fight. Like we would talk about matchmaking and stuff like that, and we've had disagreements about, certain guys, or like he finds somebody boring and I'd want to bring him back, or stuff like that. But he did leave like that to me, and he very rarely. I can't remember any time he actually vetoed or just said no. So he let me do what I want.
And I know like Aaron Riley was kind of like one of the flagship guys of that promotion early on. You know, tell me some things you might remember about Aaron Riley's fights. I'm close to Shane Garrett, who lives here where he lives
Oh,
close to me. He's been on my show a few times. He lives in this area, and I know he fought Aaron Riley in your show. So maybe talk
yeah.
about Aaron Riley a little bit.
You know, the thing is that Aaron's from Tell City, and it's the whole thing's a nice story. And then when you consider they made it to UFC, and he got, to fulfill like his, you know, he was a kid at 16 fighting with parents' permission, and wanted to be a UFC fighter, like, however many kids, but he actually got to do it. And a lot of that was because of Jeff's guidance. They had a very nice relationship. I got to be a part of it. I think, Aaron will give me credit for, certain things where I helped him along, but it was based on just modeling, handling him like he was, he's special. So we handled him that way pretty much the whole way through. Some people say no, because I got him knocked out by Chris Lytle. I got him knocked out by Eddie Alvarez. You know what I mean? But it's like that's besides the point. Aaron's he was special to the show, and it was important. And he very much, as he blossomed, helped the hook and shoot name blossom as well. And that was the nice thing to see about him too. Is it's cool to be, the biggest star in Tell City where he's from. How does that carry over onto, pay-per-view and then or TV and stuff? And the first time we saw him at that level, he fought Bobby Lawler in a pretty much, a very memorable fight in the early UFCs, pre-Zuffa, really, I think. If not, it was the first Zufas, but so he held up and it carried over. And that's nice to see when you see the development of a fighter. I got to see that for like now there's a whole generation of guys that I don't have that familiarity with, but there are guys that when they fought and them and stuff, it just puts a whole different spin on the show. And that I think too is why a lot of guys like us get burnt out on the sport now too, because it really was personal when the guys.
Yeah, and wasn't Steve Berger one of the guys that fought in your show too? I believe, if I remember.
Sure, a ton. Yeah. Uh, Pretty much the same. I think you can find a standard type of Midwest, hardworking, willing to fight anybody kind of guy, and you'll see a lot of them spend time with us. You know what I mean? Berger fought a lot of people for us, including Aaron Riley at some point. Um, he, Keith Wisniewski is another one from the Midwest that fits that mold. We did Brian Garrity a recent interview, which is another one of, Strasser guy. Strasser himself. So yeah, they all to me have a very special spot because some of them may not have been champions and stuff, but champions don't get to be champions without tests. And these guys, really, did it for very little money. They did it for the pride and for other reasons. And that's kind of a little bit of a different thing now. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit because I don't think, I'm always trying, like when I'm on some of these other platforms, trying to tell new fans about how it was a very different vibe back then because everyone was doing it more for the love, really. So maybe, I don't know how you could articulate it in your own way if you were going to describe that to somebody. I mean, I know there's other scene like skateboarding scene or punk scene or whatever, these anything that comes up from nothing. Maybe talk about that.
I think that the fighters are something else because obviously with the dedication they have to put in, they saw something. But I think that there is a group of those early people, Monty Cox, some of those people like that where they saw something. They saw the potential there. They said, this could be big. And that, believe it or not, that hope had a lot to do with it, because why would a guy fight for $2,000? The expectation is, somewhere down the line, he's going to make a lot more. And I think that there was a lot of hope about that. Promoters keep promoting because eventually they like to be on TV and make money and stuff like that. But everybody knew that the sport wasn't something that you wanted to give up on. You know what I mean? If you did, and you weren't there for for the pop, then that's one of those things. I do think that that's kind of like the fairy tale that was sort of not voiced by everybody. We knew it was going to be big. I mean, it had to be cleaned up, and it's very different after the cleanup, But it is now what it is. It is a $1 billion sport. It is, being practiced in countries around the world at a high level. Everything that you could see starting to happen. In 1997, when you got a tape of the Russian absolutes, there were guys on those tapes like Maxim Tirasov, like Mikhail Ilyukhin, like a young Igor Vovchanchin. You're like, not every guy in there is like, an idiot or a fool. You know what I mean? There's some guys in there that are dangerous, and that's Russian first generation guys, and if you watched rings, you saw that. So you knew Russia was going to be a power. These guys are just, following on the generations. And Oleg wasn't even the first one, So I think if you saw it and you saw the potential for it, and you saw it's like, hey, it's big in Brazil. It's like, why? Because again, it's like boxing that people, when they get immersed in it, they dedicate their lives to it, and that only is something special, only is capable of that type of draw. So I think that's what it is. It's the magic of seeing the potential is really what it all comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a more, I don't want to sound nostalgic, but I think there was a specialty to it, between the fighters and also the circle of people who felt like they were part of it coming up. They were growing with the sport. The people on the forums and things like that.
Yeah, it was very like when you could go to a UFC and like hang out with the fight and like be in a hotel room after fight party with like I'll give you a great example. Entering a hotel elevator, and Randy Couture was there, right? And I knew who he was because I was there to cover that, and he just looked at me and was like, "Hi, I'm Randy. Like literally like that, because he didn't know if I knew him. He didn't know, he didn't know what was going on. And it was like that accessible. And it's no longer like that, you know? The other anecdote or thing that you can think of, it does things change. They just change. You can't stop change. So why would Aaron Riley fight Nico Vitale in Hawaii, with a 30-pound weight disadvantage? Because they've gotten his plane ticket and, he was there. And nowadays, no fighter would take that. There's just because there's no reason to. They don't have to. The circumstances have improved, and that doesn't happen as much. You know what I mean? So I think that part of it too is the limited opportunities. Fighters put themselves in a lot of positions that nowadays fighters say, "You're crazy. I wouldn't do that." Like when John Jones didn't take the fight with Chael Sonnen. I think you could tell by Jones's reaction that that's the next generation's reaction. It's like, no way, it's not a perfect circumstance for me. Why would I do that? And that's an advance, but you do give something up, and that's that kind of like personal touch, I guess.
So let's kind of talk about, Hook and Shoot's progression. Can you kind of, maybe not the long version of it, but maybe walk me through some of the stages, maybe like as it was growing or where you thought it was at its apex, that kind of thing.
Okay. Jeff did the first show in 96. In 97, I went. By 98, I was his matchmaker. And in 99, I went to Abu Dhabi with a credential as a press person for a website, the Fight World website that we did. I roomed with Travis Fulton, who was there as a competitor. But I went alone. Like there was Japanese press. I don't know. Eddie Goldman wasn't there. I don't think there was much American press at all. And I had known that she followed my website. I knew that. And so I got to go that year in 99. And that led to us doing the trials. And it led to a lot of other things. In 98, the first Abu Dhabi happened, and it was kind of a mystery. Like everybody mainly heard about it afterwards. In 99, they kind of invited like a new level of people. Like there was no Rafael Torres competing. You know what I mean? And it was getting a lot bigger. But again, they were still trying to do things on their own. So I can tell you in 98, you didn't see the video of it for like 9 months. And what happened is the people, they got a crew to tape it. And then, it's 3 tournaments at once. It's 3 matches at once and 100 competitors. And the production crew didn't know anything about fighting, didn't know who Hoyler Gracie was. So, how do you make a tape that's producible? The high level people there, the sponsors, the Sheik, Guy, Nevins, people like that would have to sit down and be like, okay, that's this guy, that's this guy, because they're the only ones who knew the fighters. They love the sport at that level, but it's like the production. So that's why the 98 videos weren't seen for many, many months, and the 99 ones weren't either. Interestingly, at some point there, in their frustration, he asked me, Guy, and I'm talking about Guy Nevins. I never really spoke to the Sheik. I had one conversation with him. And Guy said, don't you video your own show? And so I was like, yeah, we do. In Indiana, it's little. And he said, do you think you could do this? And I mean, I hung up, I called Jeff, and we sat down and we just figured it out. Like, look, he said, what do you need? And I said, okay, look, I'm just going to answer that question. It's like, we're short cameras. We shoot 1 ring. To shoot 3, we're short cameras. How much crew can we take? Other equipment, the editing booths and stuff like that, et cetera, it came out to be about, I don't know, maybe $50,000 in equipment that we would have needed to do the show. And I went to work. And the next day, they had FedExed me a check for that amount and said, just buy it and come and do the show. So Jeff, being the production, and he did the production for all those Abu Dhabis, you know, that were sold through our site and stuff was Jeff at home doing it by himself. He knows the fighters, but still, it's, you know, he's not. I don't know if he's that big a grappling fan that he, you know, that he likes doing that in a crash course. But that's really how it started. And after that, they were like, okay, that was great. Can you do it so that we could see the fights in, you know, like a week? So, which means some form of editing had to be going on live, and they gave us another bump of equipment and stuff like that. By producing and selling those shows, the experience we got, but also selling them in the bump in income that was, they were a $200 set of 7 or 8 DVDs. That took the show to the next level, you know. After that, we started getting the attention of Dan Lambert in Florida, and he sponsored our shows for a lot. You know, we actually transplanted to do hook and shoots in Fort Lauderdale. They continued to do them under AFC. I did the first 15, and then I moved on. But like that relationship with Dan, I would consider with the Abu Dhabi stuff. So you know, we didn't have to just suck everything out of Dan like other promoters had. We could, you know, bring our own. I have some matches. You know, can you help with the, you know, and we made it work for a while. And we got, you know, Dan what he wanted, which was experience for his what he was growing. At that point, a promoter named Vlad came out, a Russian promoter out of New Jersey, and that became the Euphoria MFC shows that eventually became BoDog. It was that promoter Vlad was the guy who signed the promotional contract with BoDog, and you know, on BoDog at that point, you know, we had a full budget and just, you know, didn't know what we were doing, but that was you know, we produced 70 TV shows that were on Infinity TV. We did 2 pay-per-views, and you know, you know, I've seen other people, but it's like Affliction had a terrific roster, but I had 100 people on my roster. You know what I mean? It's like they didn't have they weren't building a roster to compete for UFC. You know, and I can make the same arguments for Strikeforce or anything like that. We already had 100 people under contract, and the guys that had better contracts, a lot of them turned into stars, and we were kind of looking for that, you know. So BoDog was about as big as it got, but that run ended September of about 2008, I think. We did a show in conjunction with Strikeforce. I think it's still listed as Strikeforce on Sherdog, but I was the matchmaker for at least some of the fights. I think Matt Lee fought George Masvidal. That show was at the Playboy Match. That was the last show I did for BoDog. After that, I left or was, you know, was terminated.
Let's talk about Dan since you brought him up. I did talk about him a little bit with Andre Binky, who I had on my show a while way back. And, you know, a lot of people, he always says that Dan's kind of like one of the unsung people of building the sport that probably nobody knows, especially in the sport today, new fans. Maybe talk about what you know about him. I mean, what was his business background to begin with? I know Binky talked about some of that, but you worked with him, so you probably knew a little bit more.
I got to be honest with you. You know, I've you know, you hear rumors and stuff, but I never, you know, got a vibe from Dan that he wanted, you know, to let me cross that line and like know about, you know. I've heard he owned Carnival Cruises, you know, Royal Princess Cruises. I've heard he made money in timeshares and stuff like that. What I do know is that in my little run, one of the things that helped Hook and Shoot, you could listen to the progression there was, you know, the Sheiks backed us, Dan backed us, Vlad backed us, and then BoDog backed us. So I've had access to 4 millionaire type sponsors and stuff like that. And the best ones are the ones like Dan or the Sheik, where they have a passion for the sport. Vlad was more in it for the money and kind of like the ostentatiousness of it. And he did like the sport, but it's not the same, you know. I think I was talking to Osborne online, and he said he had recently seen a TV show where Dan was on it, and they were highlighting his pro wrestling belt collection. So his passions also root in more or less the same roots as Jeff and mine, which come from pro wrestling into this, you know. So, um, Dan's a really special person because, nobody, the thing about it is nobody really can force him to do anything. I mean, so everything he did, every dime he spent, at some point, I think he wanted to. And I think, the sport would not be where it was without him. So, yeah, he's come out a little more in the last few years. Like I've seen him on the Ultimate Fighter and stuff like that. And usually, like that surprised me. I didn't think it was something he would do. But that's cool. That's cool. He should get some credit somehow, because there's no doubt the sport wouldn't be here without him. No way, shape, or form.
Yeah, because I know he was pretty influential behind the scenes with the UFC, even.
Yeah, I've actually, one story I heard, and I think it may have been from Dan. If it's not Dan, he'll have to forgive me. But somebody, I'm pretty sure it was Dan. I think he actually put $250K down as a down payment to buy the UFC from Meyerowitz. And Zuffa kind of moved in, closed the deal and stuff, and he sort of lost that money. It didn't come back to him. But he actually made a down payment to do it. And I think the rest of the conversation went in that he's happy that Zuffa, they were the right people to do it. Like when he found out it was the Fertitas. Like I'll tell you another Dan story. We talked about Vegas, and he's a VIP at the casinos and stuff like that. But he loved Atlantic City, and he said to me, "I'm a whale here." And I said, "You're a whale everywhere." He's like, "Yeah, but Vegas is different. I'm a whale here." So there are levels to this game, and the Fertitas are billionaires, And I think he, as astute as he is, I think he recognized that really is what was needed here. So, his 250 didn't, but I think he actually lost 250 and was definitely making a play to be the owner there, and it would have gone differently, but it was in the hands of someone who loved it. So, it would have been interesting.
Yeah, I think John Peretti alluded to that. He did an interview with Bobby Razik that's on YouTube where he was saying he had a partner that had put down $250,000 because they were trying to purchase it and ended up losing his money. He didn't name Dan Lambert, but I assume that's who he was talking about.
It maybe Meyerowitz collected a bunch of 250s from people too.
Yeah, because he said if Zuffa hadn't bought the UFC, he would have, and he even had a partner that was they were so certain that was going to happen that he put down a $250,000 down payment and lost it.
Okay. I can neither confirm nor deny. That sounds very plausible. There's a possibility that that Peretti had somebody else, because Peretti definitely is a guy, roots in the Hamptons in New York and stuff. I think he's a guy that had his level and played it. It could get sponsors. Remember, he was the first competitor to UFC on pay-per-view with Penthouse as a sponsor. So, but it's probably Dan. I totally agree. But I'm just saying I can't say for sure.
So, I lived in Saudi Arabia for 8 years when I was a kid, from I think age 6 to about almost 14. And my dad was working for Aramco. So I want to know what you thought it was like going to Abu Dhabi for the first time.
The first time we went, it was kind of crazy because, they asked us to video this event. We really didn't know if we could do it. And, we took like 30 people there. And at some point, it's like, Aaron Riley went, and his job was when a cameraman ran out of batteries, he would have to bring them fresh batteries, take the old batteries, and bring the batteries, to be recharged. And also bring the tapes and label the tapes. Camera 1, tape 1, camera 1, tape 2. That was Aaron's job, But, so we tried, we filled it in. We took some people like Aaron, a lot of hook and shoot crew, but it's a small crew. At some point, my brother went. My brother's an MD now, and he does nothing to do with fights or anything like that. High school friends that I had, that I loved and knew I could rely on went with me. So it was kind of like you talked about that kind of like spirit of like, yeah, we got to get this done. So it was fun, but it had its angle of craziness, we uh, we stayed. It was a nice hotel, and they had a bar there, so that was one of the first things that all right, so we drank a lot to get the job done, and we got the job done as far as the videos and stuff like that. Um, I can't compare it to Saudi. I've never been to Saudi Arabia, but I picture that it's very different. Like I don't think, especially in the time frame you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like I mean, there was a liberal aspect of like the Western bars in the hotels with like a lot of like Russian business women and that sort of stuff, which I'm sure is everywhere, but it was a little more prevalent, a little more open and stuff like that. Like I had thought we were facing 2 weeks dry. So, as a drinker, I was kind of like happily surprised over that. I knew, like, I'm not, like, I wasn't going there completely ignorant of the culture and things like that. And I knew who Sheikh Taknoon was in terms of with the royal family and things. So I knew we were very well sponsored. When we got to the airport, I came with, guess what? I gave him a gift of a whole bunch of bootleg tapes, Shudo, a whole bunch of stuff. And I bought them with me, and somebody in security at the airport said, all right, we're going to have to check these, I was like, oh, check away, they're my gift to the Sheik. And when I said that, it got easier. You know what I mean? Yeah, and you could see the authoritarian, like when he walked, like, they had the fighters waiting for the weigh-ins 3 hours in the gym. I remember Kerr pacing around like, upset, and people were really mad and stuff, but we were waiting for the Sheik to show up. He was late, and it wasn't going to start without him, and it's just the way it is there. You know what I mean? But they treated us very well, and like I said, the overwhelming thing you feel there is that the Sheik himself, like I remember, like I said, I talked to him once at a press conference, which was when he said I could use his rules for trials. And that's where the idea was sort of created. I said, I could do your rules in my show. And he said, I will help you. And that's the only time I ever talked to him. Other than that, I went through Guy. But you knew that there was a passion there. I remember walking into the gym in Abu Dhabi, and there he was, the Sheik, rolling with Vitor Belfort. And like his Russians, Sasha Savko, and a few of the guys that were from the club, all sitting around there and stuff like that. And like I said, you might find Dan like that, but not Vlad, and definitely not Calvin, right? So differences between the sponsors.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, like, even he isn't really visible anymore, even with Abu Dhabi, which has kind of moved mostly to the US. Have you even followed it since, like, where it's gone to now with Gordon Ryan, being so dominant and things? Have you even watched it?
No, I got to be honest with you. 2007 was the last one I did. And after that, I watched it a little bit, but to me, it doesn't happen enough. And like the trials are not public enough and stuff like that. So it's like there are a few things, but no, it's not. It's not because I don't like it or don't, back it. But it's just, I guess, after you have Indian food and see it live, you can't just have a hamburger and see it on the internet anymore. You know what I mean? It's like, I do enjoy going to the shows and things like that. And without doing that, it's harder for me to follow it. I spent like 3 years not watching UFC. So
Yeah, I think Rudyard Moncayo, I just talked to him, and he actually made a good analogy. He said, for me, watching the UFC these days, it's kind of like the magician. I've seen all these illusions and these magic tricks already. I've seen this show. He was actually saying Triller is something I haven't seen, where Jake Paul fights MMA fighters or celebrities fight. He found that to be very interesting. We talked about that quite a bit because of the unknown. Is Jake Paul going to beat Ben Askren? Is Logan Paul going to have any success against Floyd Mayweather? And yeah,
is that what's going on? Logan is fighting.
Yeah, Floyd? The brother, and I just, after last night's event, some guy asked Dana White, I heard you blocked GSP from boxing De La Hoya on a Triller card, and he got real upset about it. Like, You know, even being asked about, he's like, this guy calls me every day asking for fighters for my roster, you know, and I don't understand why. You could tell he was visibly irritated by the question, which he doesn't usually react unless it's something that's getting attention. Don't you think?
Well, here, first of all, Dana, Dana may be the only guy more important in the sport than Dan Lambert, for the foundation of it. So, props, and you got to give him credit, but he's a salesman too. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't see much different. I didn't watch the Askren fight, didn't pay attention to it. I haven't clicked on a single Jake Paul video. I don't care. I did see Dana's response to it because it was part of the greater press conference where he did get grumpy and stuff like that. But it's like, if I was Dana, and it's like, those are huge shoes to fill. I'm not trying to be arrogant, but if I was Dana, Conor McGregor wouldn't have happened on my watch. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm a purist. I'm a sport purist. Now he's trying to come off as a sport purist after giving us Conor McGregor. And Conor's backed it up at the early circus, How about things like giving Ronda Rousey a belt, letting her enter the octagon as a champion without ever having fought? Why? Because you're selling just like Triller. But when you're not doing it, you get grumpy. Okay, I mean, that's okay, You're the one who's going to retire with $500 million, and that's, you can do it your own way. Start a new one, I'm not knocking it, but it does come across as a little bit like that to me. He's still protecting his product, and did they take a bite out of it? Oh, I think they've got people's attention, the Paul brothers, and the only interesting thing to me is, if they somehow come back to me, or it comes back and they say, he's going to fight X, how about Lee Murray or, somebody absolutely that, he's not going to have much of a chance against, then I'm going to be like, oh, their media machine made a mistake. But until then, they're only doing what the UFC did, with Conor, with Ronda, with, Chael, and, I mean, the Conor thing, I guess the real example that sticks with a purist is he took at some point, what's the kid for Frankie Edgar? He took Frankie Edgar's title shot. That was Frankie Edgar's title shot. It's simple in sport. and only when you're not in sport do you say, well, this makes more sense money-wise. Let's move Conor in there and let Frankie sit because he's a good soldier. So he's done the same thing. So, and we've known he doesn't like Oscar, So.
And De La Hoya, I think, is talking about moving his whole roster over to Triller.
Dana's right in that I find Oscar hard to really, I don't buy his promotional angles and things like that. Like they don't sell with me. I don't buy. I see him as a, oily. I don't like him. So this goes back to the Canelo and then the Canelo breakup and things like that. He ignored his roster for Canelo. The Golden Boy roster that he had didn't blossom, didn't grow. He didn't do the events he said he did. He did some LA shows in the clubs and things like that and stuff like that. But when you have $300 million in a war chest, right? There are times where his effort's been short. And take it from somebody who likes to party, or in my day, has probably made a fool of himself a few times. You know what I mean? But Oscar's taking it to a whole new level where it's like it is hard to respect him. And I'm not talking about years ago. I'm talking about what he was talking on the commentary and stuff,
But that adds something to it. If he comes back to fight, say, like a Eddie Alvarez, I know that's someone they were throwing around. There would be some doubt on who was going to win, De La Hoya or Alvarez. There would be, I don't know how split the crowd would be,
in boxing,
or the fan base.
Is it in boxing?
Yeah, even in boxing, I think De La Hoya would beat Alvarez, even if he's out of his mind. But Alvarez, much younger, is a formidable, puncher. It's the element of the unknown, like Moncayo was talking about. What is the magician going to pull out of his hat,
Yeah. No, there are ways you could do it, and I don't know. I wonder. It's funny
Because I
because
would wonder, is De La Hoya going to look terrible and Alvarez just beat him up? Or is he going to be Oscar De La Hoya, but older and still find a way to win?
well,
That
the
would be
other
my thought process.
here's the question: is so Mayweather and this Jake Paul guy is an exhibition officially?
That's what they're saying, yes. No, Logan Paul. Jake Paul is the one who fought Askren, but Logan is the brother. Yeah.
Okay, I
Big guy. He's
yeah,
much bigger than Mayweather.
yeah, you know. My thing is this is in the exhibition world, and this applies to Oscar, is who's going to test him? Because you can get cleaned up for one run like that, and I think Oscar has the pride and knows the gym enough that he can come in and I'm not saying it like the Tyson Roy Jones but that was a decent exhibition for older guys. And knowing it was an exhibition, I enjoyed that. I'm all right with throwing paychecks at some of those people, but that was well done, and I haven't seen too many of the new ideas for like the next one's going to be this guy versus this guy that I think is going to be they're going to be able to pull off. I think it's got to be taken seriously and stuff like that. And I think you could do something like that. You can invite karate guys to get beat up and this and that and the other thing. You could do a sideshow, but
I got a name for you. Diego Sanchez.
ooh,
The UFC just let him go. He could fight Jake Paul. He's a nut. He's a
yeah,
madman.
I
It
think
would it would be a very fun fight to promote.
I think if I were advising Jake Paul, I'd advise him to not do that fight. I don't know, Diego, there's a lot of like negative like vibes going his way and stuff, but at the end of the day, that guy's probably forgotten a lot more about fighting than most people will ever know. And that includes those guys, those brothers there who picked this up 3 years ago. It's like, I think that could look a lot like the Mickey Gall fight.
Yeah, but you never know. Like I saw Henry Cejudo on Instagram, and he was saying, "Look, I boxed. I was in Golden Gloves. These guys are training seriously, and you'd be surprised." He said, "I think most MMA guys that fight this Jake Paul guy are gonna lose to him because he's gonna be, aware enough to deal with, the limited boxing ability that they have, even if they're dangerous." He's saying, like, yeah, Tyrone Woodley has a good right hand, but a guy who's dedicating himself to boxing can find a way to deal with that and still win the match.
Yeah, but,
So it'd be interesting. Like you're saying, you think Diego would win. So there's that element, right? Can Jake Paul beat Diego Sanchez or not?
here, there's still a tier of guys in MMA that they're good. Like, what about like a Rob Whitaker?
Yeah, those guys are never going to get it because they're on the UFC. The UFC will never let them go. I'm talking
No,
about someone that
no,
could.
I'm just talking about his technique. I'm just talking
Right,
about
right.
what Jake Paul sees in the ring. The guy's bigger, not bigger than Jake Paul, but bigger than the other opponents he's looked at. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely more of a threat. And the guy's, hands are better than most MMA guys' hands. So, they're I understand. Look, if you can make money, go grab it. I have no problem with it. And Askren, well, what's one more embarrassment? You know what I mean? It's like, but he grabbed $1 million, so I understand. You can't. He deserves it. How many times did he go out, and wrestle 5 or 6 times a day for no money? If you could get something for it at the end like that, cash in. I'm all for it. I wish he had done better, but I'm okay with it. You can't get me to pay much attention to it. I can't. I'll find out about it. What happens afterwards.
How far can Triller go, you think?
Look, I remember when we did the first BoDog pay-per-view, which was Ron Waterman against Roger Gracie as the main event. Eddie Alvarez fought Aaron Riley on it, and didn't make the pay-per-view because our production crew thought that that's the fight they should struck. But anyway, BoDog also had a BoDog music thing, and they wanted to do an intermission and bring out one of their bands to do like a 5-song set. And I was just like, no, 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 because if you're in the right crowd, you got rap fans and rock fans and maybe older people and younger people. If you filled in it, you're unlikely to get everybody who's going to be turned on by the same music. Definitely not cool for the band. You know what I mean? So it's like you're not doing them any favors. I don't think it's a dead gig. They actually played with the boxing commission there, and the boxing commission turned their back and put in earplugs, right? So it's like I music. I've seen comedians warm up for MMA shows and stuff. This type of stuff doesn't work. And I mean, they did it at a different, with guys with 300 million views on YouTube. Justin Bieber did a song and stuff like that. But it's like, Justin Bieber's not going to be on every Triller show, and so I think that they have very much the look of a flash in the pan. What I guess this is what's left of the Zone. Remember the Zone? That was something everybody look at here. This is what's interesting. Here's the difference between Dana and Oscar, just for other people, and why Dana can be a ranting lunatic about him is because he really does stand head and shoulders over. Here's two guys. Give them both $300 million with their own promotions and stuff, going one way or another. Dana takes his promotion off of the relationships he has with whatever channels, Spike, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and winds up on ESPN. Not bad. An old company with old blood, old money. ESPN's going nowhere. And Oscar goes with the Zone because they gave Canelo, $365 million, which he never got, which, was just a number that was thrown out there. And they gave him, they couldn't make the Golovkin stuff fight. They had, Fly. They had no answers. And meanwhile, Dana never scraps the show, always finds another opponent or has a plan or a plan B and a plan C. And they went with the Zone with absolutely no history in the sport or anything like that because $365 million is all Oscar saw. And now you see the disaster that was. You also notice in the boxing world, Bob Arum, Tyson Fury. Oh yeah, they also went with ESPN. Right? So it's like, yeah, Oscar really didn't do in the last few years a good job with it. But the Zone went away as a kind of maybe they were ahead of their time, but they're not a player anymore. And I see Triller will do that at some point. There's somebody will take a loss, or even they'll have Jake or Logan or somebody will lose, and it'll get derailed and stuff. But it has that feel of it's a a sideshow, like, and Triller hasn't shown me anything that tells me that they can go beyond promoting this type of fight.
What do you think about the UFC's IPO?
We're at a different level now, right? I mean, you could tell there's so many signs of it that, like we touched on it, where Aaron took the fight and stuff like that. Now fighters don't even have to operate with that type of thing. They can turn it down, get another fight. It's a whole different ballgame. And I think it's actually now we're in a post-Dana world, right? With the new company that's there and stuff like that. What scared me was the conversation that Sean Shelby had with Diego Sanchez's manager, where he said to him, "Hey, how you doing? I got XX, our lawyer, here with me." And that's always a bad sign and stuff like that. But that lawyer and that presence, that says a lot. And that's the IPO and having to worry about, the value of the stock and answer to stockholders and things like that. And he said it there. He said, we can never be in a situation where a fighter is doing XXX and speaking against them. So, yeah, it's just become bigger and more corporate and more foreign to, people that used to do it in the gym, on handshake deals.
Is it the beginning of the end when you do that, an IPO?
No, I think the product's going to be there. It'll be there for a while. It'll have its ups and downs, and at some point they won't have any stars. It'll be small, and I don't think it'll fold. I think there'll always be a UFC there, but at some point they can reverse that and they go back to private and things like that. It's all, I mean, Dana's leaving with a lot of money. You know, Rahm Emanuel's brother is the guy who owns the UFC now. Basically, is that? I mean, these guys. That's we talked about levels. Is like those guys may represent a higher next level than even the Fertittas.
Right, but when you got people like that, when you're answering to shareholders, now they want to mess with it. Like the old Bellator, right? I was a big fan of that. The tournament season Bellator, I loved it.
Okay.
But I know when, Bjorn Rebney kind of, I don't know the guy, but I noticed when they started to get bigger, he was out all of a sudden. It was like, what? This is the guy who built the promotion. It looked like it had momentum. And it's funny, nobody really talks about their ratings anymore or things like that. Why? Because they're not interesting anymore. No one cares. Dana White's not upset with Bellator anymore. But, I figured that he had shareholders to answer to, and they just felt like we're going to go in a different direction, even if it didn't make sense,
Yeah, that could be. But the UFC's already, light years ahead of anything that Bellator could be.
Right.
And what they, with all the angles of like the Apex shows and, maybe fight nights coming back and, maybe going back here, there, the pay-per-views and non-pay-per-views and shows on free TV and stuff. What they really did was worked up to being at least weekly. So, they have an ability to fill a spot, take a guy, move him, keep people on. They do things like that intuitively now because of what they've built that Bellator can't touch. If Bellator announces a main event and the guy falls apart, a couple of like with the Yoel Romero fight and stuff like that. They put a lot in Yoel Romero versus Anthony Johnson. That's what they wanted. I think there was almost a feeling that they're actually getting guys that are still maybe viable from UFC and stuff. Maybe Dana knew something we didn't know about Anthony Johnson. A lot of that fell apart ugly, but they don't have a B plan to go on or anything glossy or nothing, and that's a lot of to do with Bellator's relationship with their TV schedule. It's like if they're not on TV, they don't have a show. So it's like the roster, sits, and the UFC doesn't have to play. That's why they're not in the game.
Yeah, I mean, those are some great points you bring up. It's the UFC does have those backup plans, and they can kind of go in any which direction they need to.
Yeah, I mean, and it makes them powerful too because they could, if you don't want to, you sit. Tyrone Woodley sat and things like that. They do get what they want in general. It's like, why would Frankie Edgar, take? Not mount at least a verbal campaign to try to get that fight over Conor McGregor way back when. Yeah, because they probably told him, hey, it's better to shut up, let us do it, and we'll take care of you. And hey, they bought it, And nobody's got that kind of pull. And they do throw, a lot of times you back that up enough, and they have. They've made stars and they've made rich people and they've taken care of people and stuff like that. Bellator is not even in the galaxy.
Right. But I loved the way Bjorn Rebney ran it. I thought, okay, we're on one night a week. We know when it is. It's going to be Friday night. This is the format. The matches, you knew why they were happening. The winners of this match fight the winners of this match. Kind of, it's very easy to follow. Anyone with a brain could follow the format as to where UFC, it's just fight to fight. It's just kind of like John Peretti said, fighter A fights fighter B, C fights this guy and this guy and this guy, and it's always like that, which kind of makes it feel like a show you're seeing in Vegas. I saw this show before, this show, and that's something that's kind of, I mean, how do you feel about what you're seeing today? You said you haven't watched some UFCs. I know you still watch some of them, but what do you feel about what you're seeing today?
Yeah, like on the undercard, it's like you know they're newer guys, so that they're a little more raw and stuff like that. There are a lot of guys on UFC that wouldn't have been on UFC at some point, but they have shows every week, and now can develop in the UFC their own guys. Charles Oliveira fought 20 times before he got the fight for the title. That didn't used to happen. So maybe um, I watched that fight with Chandler and the Oliveira, and I thought it was excellent. I thought it
Yep.
was high level. I thought Chandler did a good job of representing, Bellator. If you want to take that angle on it, I think he's got nothing to be ashamed of. I think, Bellator can now say that they had a guy every bit as good as anybody on the UFC roster and stuff like that. Because I give Chandler props for the show, and Oliveira's he's the hot guy. Maybe next, we'll see who he gets. If he gets Justin Gaethje next, we could be in a situation where maybe, we're in guys capture the belt, lose the belt, capture the belt, lose the belt, capture the belt, lose the belt. So we'll see.
On Bellator, they also had Pit Bull, who looked like, maybe he could, if he was in the UFC, it'd be competitive. Volkov, who's doing pretty well at heavyweight. So yeah, they've shown that they built up some guys who are pretty good ultimately. You know,
Yeah, Alvarez. They
Alvarez, yeah,
so he was the first one. He won the belt. So that was good. And that was good on Bellator. But I think Alvarez isn't totally their product. You know
right.
what I mean? Um, but yeah, they should get the credit for Alvarez that a Bellator guy won the championship and stuff like that. Um, at the end of the day, I think Eddie has a little bit to do. I think Jordan forgot a little bit. He wasn't a real humble guy, right? So, and I think there are times where that does do you well, and that whole hey Eddie, we'll match pay-per-view percentages stuff really was disingenuous. You know what I mean? It really made him look bad, and eh, if he recognized that, that might have been a good time to leave because it was going to be, I think it was just a misstep, and it was going to earmark him for other people. He was going to be suspicious to a lot of people in the business negotiating after that. It's like that was low.
Yeah, those are good points. What did you think of the fight last night? I felt like it had a big fight feel, even though it was more like for hardcores, I would say. There was, I mean, a lot of new fans like those guys too, but it had kind of like, man, either guy could win, kind of big fight feel to it.
Yeah, yeah, and it was a
And
back and
that
forth.
we haven't had that a lot lately.
It was a back and forth round. The first round was good, was a good solid round. De Oliveira took some shots. Um, uh, Chandler did work out of bad positions and stuff. So they both got to show things. And I think that's all that you can want. So it's like I'd be very happy with the fight. To me, to be honest with you, it's like we talk about old school guys and guys. It's like there's a guy on the card that was a person that I knew, from the Abu Dhabi days and stuff like that, and he got his arm broke. So after the Ronaldo Jacare fight, I was just like, it was a little bit emotional stuff, and that's just the way it goes, But it was personal. I thought Ferguson looked shot. Ferguson looks like a flat-footed boxer. You know what I mean? Like he's not on his toes anymore. His reactions, and it's a shame because he's still going to be dangerous to so many people. But I don't like the physical signs I saw of him when he got shot, and he can't get off anymore. He's got Tyrone Woodley disease, where I think somebody said he'd thrown 30 total punches in his last couple of fights, and it was visible he did not get off against the guy who's not really, Dariush is solid, but not explosive. He was. I think Dariush was willing to play counterpuncher in the early part of the fight, and Ferguson had nothing coming his way. So I think that makes me a little bit sad when I see guys like that. And it's a weird sport because I've seen those signs in like other people, and then they come back and look great. Max Holloway is another guy that I watch always with that little bit of trepidation in the back of my head because, you know, a couple of shots and we could be looking at something kind of not cool, you know. And I think Ferguson's joined that territory, man. He's a guy that I don't think ever trained smart.
Let's talk about your show that you do, Chris Lytle. You know, it's an old school show, kind of similar to better than mine. Obviously, you have a lot of guys on there, but what made you decide to do it and to go this kind of route?
You know, we got some time on our hands. Um, I've been dabbling with like doing news reports, and I worked for a sports book, so we did a lot of taping of like odds and things for the shows. I was taping with the other guy on the show's promoter, Mike Davis, out of the Midwest. He came up with the idea. I know Chris. You know, Chris fought for us in Indiana a long time ago, and you know, he's a guy. I think I did the right thing by him, and he still works with me, so I guess he does too, right? And he's a, you know, about as credible as you can get in terms of resume. So we've been practicing for a year, kind of doing, you know, news shows and, you know, talking about Hamzat Chamayev and this, that, and the other stuff, and doing a lot of taping that way. And in the last like 3 months, we sort of hit our niche and are transitioning into like doing like interviews with guys from like the past and stuff like that. I think the thing that really gelled it for us was we were taping and they were like, hey, you know, Chris was with Boss and let's do an interview with Boss. So Boss was the first one we did. And then the second one was Paul Varland, who passed away. And it was like, all of a sudden it was like, you know, God, I wish I had that one again. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, fuck, you know? And the interview stuff, then we peeled off like a bunch of like I would consider easy ones, like Aaron Berger, Wisniewski, and you know, core guys that have fought for me, like, you know, Toby Amada, like, and we built a 50 fight club, which is guys with 50 legitimate pro fights. Jeremy Horn did the interview, Monty Cox did it with us. So we found our niche, we kind of thing. And when we started looking at what was really said, I mean, Jeff Munson and Dennis Hallman actually stated to us that at the UFC 29 weigh-ins, this is pre-Zuffa, but at the UFC 29 weigh-ins, they destroyed the UFC scale, and that the weigh-ins went down and with a broken scale. Like everybody knew to lean forward to make it right and stuff like that. I mean, that's kind of news, you know what I mean? It's like there are interesting stories, and not to mention the fact that Munson fought a UFC title fight with a Whizzinator in, you know, to try to pass a drug test. It's like you don't get too many fighters who will admit to the PED use and stuff like that, but because of Chris and because a lot of them knew me for a long time and stuff like that, and they might be afraid of what I know too, but they've been really forthcoming. Like Jeff was like, yeah, you know, I was gonna blow clean anyway, but I couldn't take the chance. It was a title fight, so yeah, I thought it would. You know, it's like so. I think the podcast has really hit like a good level in the last couple of months, and I think we're gonna try to keep it going that way. Just history and talk to people of, you know, Chris's generation or before.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Plus, a lot of the guys on these UFC cards now, they can't, you know, they do so many interviews, one, and they kind of have to be careful about what they say or maybe not say too much, or they don't want to, you know, give their opponent motivation, these kind of things. So you can't really get, they're the same interview over and over again, you know, because they do this week. Everybody on the card last week is going to run the shows these a week, you know, and yeah.
Yeah, and I think the UFC probably has some type of contract clause limiting the interviews that they can do, you know, WWE style kind of thing. Maybe not completely, but I suspect, you know, I have other reasons to suspect that, you know, the number one reason is in the very beginning when Zuffa came aboard, Joe Silva did an interview or two in public, and I don't know what it was he said and stuff like that, but he got shut down, and you actually never saw a Joe Silva interview like this kind of thing where he's just being candid or anything like that. They clamped that down, and it was always Dana that you saw. Dana became the face of it. So I think that they very much control the media aspect and what the fighters do.
Do you think Doe is not? Do you think maybe they? I mean, I haven't seen him talk publicly at all. I'm sure people have wanted to reach out to him.
To who?
Joe
Just
Silva.
the
I like to
fighters?
have them on their
Oh yeah.
podcast.
You know, I mean, I don't know. He's not. Yeah, I think he would be a very hot commodity for a lot of people and stuff like that. And I wonder. He's been gone for a few years. I wonder how long that clause is, or if you can write, if he wants to write a book or whatever. He was always kind of a private person. At the beginning of his Zuffa days, I remember I think he's from like North Carolina originally, or at least lived in North Carolina. And he moved to Vegas. And at one point, he actually had a little bit of a disagreement. I don't know what it was about, but he actually, after moving to Vegas, moved back or was in North Carolina for a while, like kind of holding out. And it worked out and stuff like that. Again, he wasn't able to tell you a lot of stuff, but there was those types of things. So he had his way of seeing things, and he wasn't going to fold completely, but he did give up being a personality. And he's not on Facebook that I can find. I mean, I guess it's a common name, but he avoids the social media and stuff now. And he could be accessible that way. I mean, if you think of it, Sergio Bottarelli, me, Jeff Osborne, a lot of those early guys are on social media now. 20 years ago, it's like, it's like, what's the big deal? Something must be, maybe he's just a private person.
Yeah, I think maybe he had signed maybe an NDA or something.
I hope he got shares. I hope he's retired with enough money to get to the end of the day, without having to worry about too many things. He definitely, carried the flag and was influential there. Definitely an important person. And he was there from the beginning as far as a guy that paid his dues. I mean, he started out going to the shows for free, and Bob Meyerowitz would throw him $500 to consult. And when Art Davie left, he was still kind of considered green for the job. And they hired Peretti to be the matchmaker there. That was Joe's first shot. And Joe actually had to stay as a, kind of like consultant and not a full employee because of Peretti's presence. And to be honest with you, that whole thing, I don't think many people will remember. Joe handled that very professionally. He did, he may have deserved it already, and eventually he would wind up there. And Peretti's a respected guy. It's not like they didn't go out and get the best guy in the business, but that's a little conflict there that I think, from the early days that I think a lot of people won't remember. That Joe was making $500 to consult for Bob Meyerowitz.
Now, as we're kind of closing this interview, where can people find some of the stuff you're doing, or what's something you might want to tell people about?
Oh yeah, if you could check out the Lights Out podcast on YouTube, that's where we are. It's Lights Out, LYTES, after Chris's name. It obviously features Chris Lytle. He's the 50 Fight Club, right? I mean, he's got well over 50 fights. We've run into a lot of veterans that want to talk stuff, and we really, we were around, so we really get like a side of the fighters that you don't see much. A little bit of that veneer down. And just to give you one tidbit, for example, I asked Jeremy Horn about his performance in Abu Dhabi, and I was there. He fought Matt Hughes, his teammate, and he did a work. And I asked him about it, and he was like, "Oh, you're gonna make me reveal that?" But he told the whole story, wall to wall, exactly the way it was. And again, it's 20 years ago, and it's like, who's gonna do anything? But a lot of people would hold on to that. So I think we try to break barriers, and we're just trying to get the history documented as best possible. So the Lights Out podcast, Lights Out, LYTES out, and Lights Out Clips is where you can see the short stuff that's a lot of fun on the internet.
And where can they find you?
Me, they can find me on Facebook. My name, Miguel Iturrate. I'm under there. I'm on Instagram at Iturrate M. And you can check out, I usually respond to the Lights Out podcast messages. I give Chris the important ones and stuff like that, but I try to play secretary so he doesn't have to.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time. I know we went kind of long, but, You know, it's great talking to you about some history and finding a lot of things I didn't know about.
Oh no, I appreciate it. I definitely thank you so much for having me on. I don't do a lot of it. I mean, I don't get asked, and so I hope we didn't bore people. But I do think like we're concentrating on the history, and you're concentrating on the history. So we probably should just keep talking and just let it flow, have fun.
Yeah, I'm kind of trying to do more of the behind the scenes, you know, so that's kind of, I know there's a lot of people who don't get asked, but I think these people are important. And also they can, you know, articulate some things to fans from a different perspective that maybe they haven't heard, a different voice they haven't heard before.
Yeah, yeah. Like Rudyard Moncayo, that's fascinating. I want, he fought on UFC and Paredes Extreme. Like those were the two public fights he had, and he looks like he was generally one of those like, tough guys like Anthony Macias types that, in his general area, well known and probably had a ton of fights and stuff like that. Tough guy. But like on the big screen, nobody's gonna remember or have much respect for. I remember him getting kicked in the chest by Pat Smith. It's like, man, this is crazy old stuff. But I would love to talk to guys like that. I wonder.
Yeah, he's very polite and, you know, kind of soft spoken actually. But he told me people have asked him and he always said no. I don't know why he did mine then, but,
That's
you know,
cool.
he decided to.
Definitely cool. And no, hats off. That's a interview after my own heart, man.
Yeah, I'll have to connect you guys for sure.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Take care.
Yes, sir.